Around the year 1990, at a high-security prison in England, the then hugely popular singer Bonnie Tyler was scheduled to perform a concert. As told by former inmate Erwin James, the prisoners were thrilled to see their gravelly-voiced heartthrob. They filed into the gym excitedly, and as she walked onto the stage, they cheered, whooped, and whistled. All was going to be right at Lawn Lartin that day. In hindsight, the presence of a large film crew perhaps should have signaled something was off. A few seconds into her first song, Bonnie Tyler stopped, powwowed with the cameras, and then restarted. She did it again, and always playing the exact same song. Eventually, the inmates began booing, then stamping their feet. Finally, as they gave up hope they were actually going to see a real concert, they got up from their seats and headed back to the wings. As it turns out, Bonnie Tyler was filming a music video for her single called Breakout. In the end, none of this footage was used, or has ever surfaced. The music video released instead is what you're seeing now, and ultimately was a flop. But Bonnie Tyler was not alone in wanting to film herself behind bars. Far from it. Prison concerts, for whatever reason, are a recurring theme in pop music lore. Perhaps because musicians genuinely want to connect with the underbelly of society, or perhaps because it makes for a great product. Needless to say, some of these shows have gone down better than others. So this video is going to explore all the ways that you should and should not run a prison concert. Prison shows have probably always existed in one form or another. In Alison Griffith's book, Carceral Fantasies, the historian writes about how concerts, along with lectures and vaudeville performances, were popular in jails during the early 20th century. In 1901, the Ossman Banjo Club and Auburn City Minstrels performed a Thanksgiving Day concert at Auburn Prison. This one is going to get an automatic fail, since my YouTube account would probably get banned for showing the footage. However, in 1914, a vaudeville show at the same prison featured pyrotechnics, contortionists, violinists, and 9 full reels of motion pictures. That one sounds like some good, clean fun. Probably the most famous prison concerts, and the ones that made it a mainstream trend, were Johnny Cash's At Folsom Prison and At San Quentin, both of which were released as best-selling records, and the latter on film as well.
San Quentin, what good do you think you do?
It's safe to say that these concerts did well for Johnny Cash's image and legacy, but his reasons for playing them weren't all selfish either.
Shut that gate!
Back when serving with the Air Force in West Germany, Cash watched the 1951 film Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison. This inspired him to write Folsom Prison Blues, which was released on his first record a few years later.
I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time.
The song was a hit, and he soon was receiving letters from inmates across the country inviting him to come and perform. Cash first played at a prison in the late 50s and would do so many more times before his Folsom and San Quentin albums a decade later.
We got married in a fever.
It's easy to see why he was so popular with inmates at the time. Though his own criminal activities were mostly fiction, his performances were still very relatable to the incarcerated. His deep, tortured voice and stoic appearance. I think overall, the Cash prison concerts earn a thumbs up.
I slugged some jerk in Tahoe, they gave me 1 to 3. My high-priced lawyer sprung me on a technicality. I'm just visiting Springfield Prison. I get to sleep at home tonight.
Whether or not you're relatable to inmates is probably one of the more important questions you should be asking before booking a prison gig, and one that a lot of people overlook. While in the early 70s, the Grateful Dead, like Johnny Cash, did have something of an outlaw image, they were also young, artsy, fun-loving, long-haired hippies, all attributes that probably would have irked the hardened criminals. However, in 1971, they played a concert at Terminal Island, a low-security federal prison in the LA area where their sound man was serving time. It was a pretty nice gesture on the part of the band. Owsley Stanley had worked their PA since the mid-60s and introduced many innovative techniques that would greatly enhance the band's sound. He also manufactured LSD, and a lot of it. After multiple busts, he was given a 3-year sentence, and the band decided, since they couldn't get him out of jail, they'd bring the show to him. For one day at least. Amazingly, there's an audio recording of the entire set, complete with stage band.
You know, a lot of times we play concerts and get people breaking in.
The band sounds pretty good, but as roadie Steve Parrish told many years later, there was barely anyone there. The inmates were all out playing ball in the yard. For Owsley and the Grateful Dead crew, it was still a pretty good time, especially because they brought in psychedelics and passed it out between the crew. They were literally tripping while visiting prison. Urban legend has it that even the other inmates and guards got dosed, but I couldn't find any actual quotes to back that up. Still, sneaking psychedelics into a federal prison, that's a ballsy move, especially if you want to keep playing shows that aren't behind bars. Showing up to jail just to give your sound guys something to do, that's a class act. I guess they get something in between. In the 70s, there were several famous prison concerts that have now entered musical canon. B.B. King, Freddie King. As you can tell, there's a bit of a blues trend here. Although there's no video of it, John Lee Hooker's performance at Soledad Prison is one that stands out in particular for its intensity.
It serves you right to suffer. It serves you right to be alone.
The concert was recommended by his label, who saw the success of Johnny Cash's prison albums and thought they'd try and replicate it. While it wasn't nearly as commercially successful, the album is still notable for a number of reasons.
I know they dig.
For one, joining his band that day in the Soledad prison yard was his son, John Lee Hooker Jr., who himself had just been released from jail in Detroit. Secondly, the album is just heavy as shit. That fuzzy guitar and deep gritty voice.
How. Hey!
It was like the Super Bowl blues show, John Lee Hooker Jr. said about the roughly 500 inmate audience. They were so respectful and so hungry for the music, it was great. The concert, however, ended suddenly when the guards cut the power in order to do a head count. It didn't matter that they were in the presence of a blues legend. For them, it was business as usual.
Bang, bang.
As music began to change over the course of the 70s, so did prison concerts. This next one might be the most bizarre on this list, in part because it took place at the California State Mental Hospital in Napa. Not exactly a prison, but still a place you could not leave willingly. So we'll let it count. In 1978, the punk band, the Cramps, made a last-minute tour stop at the hospital. Coming from New York, they were part of the same scene as the Ramones, Television, and Talking Heads. But this audience was very different from CBGB. Or was it? The beauty of this show is that the crowd actually loves it. They perfectly absorb the chaos and absurdity of the Cramps set. And the band, for their part, play it straight, treating this gig no differently than any rock club. I think Senior Lux Interior truly means it when he says,
"Somebody told me you people are crazy, but I'm not so sure about that. You seem to be all right."
The stage was shared with the Mutants that night, but only the Cramps set was filmed. The fact that any of this got caught on camera is something of a miracle. The activities specialist who organized the show was worried he'd lose his job as soon as he saw the camcorder. Filming patients is a clear violation of confidentiality. But somehow they got away with it, and we are left with this relic today. In recent decades, prison concerts have continued to be popular. But these bands seem to have learned from the mistakes of the past, putting on shows that connect with and benefit the incarcerated. The concert I want to close out on, though, is from a band that seems rather odd in a prison context, Fugazi. Not because of their politics. Fugazi had a stronger punk ethos than anybody. But, well, let me put it this way. Fugazi's two lead singers, Ian MacKaye and Guy Picciotto, had, respectively in their prior bands, started the straight edge movement and pioneered the genre of emo. Their audience tended to be more middle class and intellectual. When they played at the Lorton Correctional Facility on the day after Christmas in 1990, it's safe to say that both parties were experiencing some culture shock. In the soundboard recording, you can hear the audience shout requests.
Sorry, sir, we don't know Fly Like an Eagle.
I wish we did. Hey, what do you guys listen to when you're not forced to listen to us, huh?
What do you all listen to
Those
anyway?
asses? Well, they couldn't make it tonight, so you stuck with us, man.
But to their credit, the band had a good sense of humor.
Top 40. Why?
It would be all too easy to give Fugazi a failing grade, for looking out of sorts, for failing to connect with the audience. But at the end of the day, they did it for the right reasons. They stepped out of their comfort zone, and some members of the audience at least had a blast. In the words of Ian MacKaye, so if you're going to plan a prison concert one day, be sure to keep these lessons in mind. Or if you find yourself on the other side of a prison concert, hope that whoever is organizing it did. And good luck.